Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strasicich, and we will be continuing on in our study here in the book of Amos. Okay, then coming back here once again to the Aleppo Codex, we come here to chapter 6, verse 8, and we're just going to read the pointing of Ben Asher here. And we begin here with Nishba Adonai Elohim Benafsho. Ne'um Adonai Elohei Tzevaot. Mita'ev Anochi et Gaon Yaakov. V'armenotav Saneti v'his Garti ir u meloa. And then we have this hypothetical sentence here, or illustration that begins here. V'haya im yevatru asara anashim b'vayit echad va'metu unesao dodo umesarefo lehotzi atzamim min habayit ve'amar la'asher beyarkete habayit ha'od imak ve'amar afes ve'amar has kilo lehazkir b'shem Adonai. Okay, then coming here, then we'll offer up our translation, beginning here with Nishba. So the Lord Yahweh has sworn by his own soul, oracle of Yahweh, God of hosts, I loathe the pride of Jacob, and his citadels I hate, and I shall shut up the city and its fullness. And then we have this hypothetical illustration. And it will be, if there are 10 men left in one house, then they shall die. And his uncle and the one who cremates him shall lift him up to bring out the bones from the house. And he will say to whoever is in the recesses of the house, is there yet with you? Meaning, is there yet anyone left? And he shall say, no, or there's an end. And he shall say, hush, for one must not cause the name of Yahweh to be remembered or to be mentioned. Okay, I don't want to look at everything here on this particular page, but Reed Lessing here has made a really good point here in this first paragraph, and this follows along with my own understanding of the passage. It says, this unit begins and ends with the same four Hebrew words. Ne'um Adonai Elohei Tzevaot, literally, an utterance of Yahweh, the God of armies. The section also is tied together by Yahweh's repeated threats involving fortresses, houses, quite possibly the royal residence functioning as ground zero. And what I want to focus on here is that you'll see that in chapter 6, verse 8, we'll have the these words, Ne'um Adonai Elohei Zevaot, and then it's then going to be repeated as an inclusio in verse 14, which ends the chapter. And it states again, Ne'um Adonai Elohei HaTzevaot, and we'll see this in the next slide. Okay, so on this slide, you can see here, I began here in verse 8, and this goes all the way down to 14. So this makes up our unit. And And remember what we just were reading there, from the Aleppo Codex, Nishba Adonai Elohim Benafsho, and the Lord Yahweh has sworn by his own soul, Ne'um Adonai Elohe Tzevaot. And then look down here at verse 14. In this tristic, for behold, I am raising up against you, O house of Israel, Ne'um Adonai Elohe Hatzevaot, Goy, a nation. So he's rising up against, the house of Israel, a nation here. But note here, Ne'um Adonai Elohe Hatzevaot, an oracle of Yahweh, the God of hosts. So he is right here to see that this is an inclusio. It's framing here to show that this unit here is intact all the way from 8 down to 14 as a larger point in the macro structure. Now this unit here that will essentially break down into two parts, 8 through 11 and then 12 to 14, and we'll look at that as we go along. But I wanted to get Lessing, right out of the box, he wanted to show that the validity of making chapter 6, 1 to 7 is a unit and 8 to 14 is our following unit. So you got to remember, we have to justify and be able to test and examine our units that we're presenting and make some type of logical conclusion thereupon. Okay, so we're just going to translate here this text straight into English, because we need to look at the whole context before we start making assessments about its structure. And the Lord Yahweh has sworn by his own soul, an oracle of Yahweh, God of hosts. I loathe the pride of Jacob, and his citadels I hate. And I shall shut up the city and its fullness. And then we have this prose section here of this hypothetical illustration to prove the point that he just made in verse 8. And it will be, if there are 10 men left in one house, then they shall die. And his uncle, or we could say his relative, and the one who cremates him shall lift him up to bring out the bones from the house, and he will say to whoever is in the recesses of the house, is there yet any with you? And he will say, no. And he shall say, hush, for one must not make mention of the name of Yahweh. For behold, Yahweh has commanded, and he shall strike the great house into pieces, and the small house into bits. And then we have this rhetorical question with its basis clause. Do horses run on rock? Or does one plow on rock with oxen? Does one plow with oxen on rock? And so obviously the answer to both of these is no. And then we have this basis clause. For you have turned justice into a poisonous herb, and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. Those, and then we have verse 13. We have this military boast. Those who rejoice at Lo Devar, who say, "Is it not by our strength we have taken for ourselves Carnaim? For behold, I am raising up against you, O house of Israel, oracle of the Yahweh of hosts, a nation." So notice how he held off nation here to the very end. "And they shall oppress you from Lebo Hamath unto the brook of the Arabah." Okay, so now what we're going to do then is look at some type of structure that we could place upon the text. And probably, the stronger of the arguments here is verses 8 to 11 as a unit. And I have broken it down into two. I do recognize that verses 12 to 14, I'm just loosely connecting them together. Otherwise, we can have, a unit here that basically is just verse 12, and then 13 and 14 would be by itself. But I think it's best just to put 12 to 14 together. It just seems to be what which would be the more natural way to group this together. But I do recognize the lack of coherence or adhesion. What the glue is binding these together here. But we can definitely state here that verses 8 to 11 make up a unit. And it's all done mainly here through the word house, which is in verse 11 and is the central part of the illustration here in 9 to 10. And the illustration here that begins in 9 to 10 explains what he had said here in verse 8. So we'll look at this. So I entitled this Amos's Report of Yahweh's Oath Oracle of Doom. And so this ends the whole unit. From chapters 13, from chapter 3 to 6, is this middle section of the book of Amos. And this is the very last unit. It's 8 to 14, and it is definitely an oath oracle of doom. There is this unit here has chapter 6 in and of itself does not have any parenetic statements in it of exhortation. This is all a prophetic judgment speech. And so this is Amos's report of Yahweh's oath oracle of doom. And it concerns Israel's pride, boast of military might, and injustice. So these things, create the cohesion that make up the unit 8 to 14. As well as, we stated here, along with Lessing, that the unit began and ended here with Ne'um Adonai Elohei Tzevaot, a declaration of Yahweh, God of hosts. It began that way in verse 8, and it also ended that way down in verse 14. So then that brings, cohesion to this whole unit as a whole. Now, okay, so now that we got the whole unit, then what can we do? It begins here with this double, it's a double report of Yahweh's, on the one hand, an oath, and then on the other hand, an oracle. So it's this combination oath oracle, because it starts off here, the Lord Yahweh has sworn by His own soul. So this is he's taking an oath upon himself, and then it further explicates an oracle of Yahweh, God of hosts, meaning the God of armies. So definitely, this whole section here, then, remember the day of Yahweh is a day of war, and so this continues this element here that Yahweh is the one who is bringing about this nation, this unidentified nation. Remember that that Assyria is never mentioned in the Hebrew text. It is mentioned, in the Septuagint. We saw that earlier, but in the Masoretic text, Amos never identifies Assyria as this nation that Yahweh is going to bring against them. It's left unidentified. And so we have this expanded introductory speech report of Yahweh's oath and oracular formulas. Okay, and then it concerns his, it's a message of Yahweh's hatred of Samaria. So Yahweh's abhorrence of Jacob's pride and Yahweh's hatred of Jacob's defenses. And then, his oath goes on to say that he will deliver up the city and its fullness. Okay, and then once you come to 9, we have this illustration, and then he leaves the poetry, the prosody here, and then he's going in here to in prose. In narrativity concerning a hypothetical illustration. And there's the depiction of if there's 10 men left in a house, then they'll all die. And then it makes up this hypothetical situation where you have to be creative to recreate the scene. Okay, so the information is rather meager, but when the text is meager, what God is doing is he's allowing you to be creative in your imagination to reconstruct the presuppositions of the intentions of the author. And so people create a couple different scenarios, of all of which are fine, whichever how you view them. And so I have taken the uncle and the cremator as two separate people. A lot of commentators actually combine them both together, but here for the text, there's a gray area, and it does want you to reconstruct this hypothetically in your own mind, and so it's fine to. I wouldn't say there's any right way to do it. It's how you. Unless you don't go, too far off the reservation. Some people combine the uncle and the cremator as one person, which was completely fine. One can do that, or you can just have them as two people. So you'd have to reconstruct this. That okay, there's this city, it got decimated. There was one house where the last survivors, there were 10 men. They were all gathered together in one house, and then they all died. And you have to assume that because it just said that it was Yahweh's oath to deliver up the city, and its fullness, and you have to, I'm reconstructing this as. Definitely pointing to Samaria, but it's not just limited to Samaria, because we don't have Ha'ir, the city. It just says a city, which means, it's referring to many different cities of Israel. But it does presuppose that, after some time after this city was decimated, that some survivors, who were left over, had come, some type of relative or uncle, and someone who's helping him as a cremator, and then other people who are scouts that are looking for survivors or looking for dead bodies, these are all presupposed here in 9 to 10. And so we have this depiction of the relative and the survivors who go in to bury the dead, and we overhear some of their conversations. And the uncle questions a scout, or is there any, he says something to somebody in the recesses of the house, and is there yet, any left with you? And the answer comes back, no. And then, I'm presupposing the uncle's directives to the scouter is hush, and then it says for. There's a basis for to refrain from speaking, and it says that the name of Jehovah must not be mentioned or must not be caused to be remembered in this place of death. Because why? Because Yahweh has, look at the very next verse. It says, now it says, for behold, Yahweh has commanded. So, this is the basis for the, for be quiet here, and do not cause Yahweh's name to be mentioned. Why? Because, you're going to have Yahweh's punishment now come upon you. Death will now come upon, the survivors who are left. Because why? Because Yahweh's command is to destroy what? The great house, reduce it to, bits and pieces, the small house. So here, everything is, it's reduced to pieces and bits, or bits and pieces, and Yahweh has commanded total destruction. So this is why, 8 to 11 is a unit, okay? Because it talking about a city, and then these houses, and, the great house and the small house. So it's all 8 to 11 is to be read together, and then you are to, verses 9 to 10 go off in prose, and it's an illustration of the inescapability of Yahweh's destruction of Samaria. And it mirrors perfectly the illustration of the inescapability of the day of Yahweh that we saw, back in chapter 5, that, one sees this lion and he runs and he escapes it somehow, and he's met by a bear, and somehow he escapes the bear, and he comes into the house, leans his hand upon the wall, and then this viper bites him. And so that was an illustration, also written in prose, that was an illustration of the inescapability of the day of Yahweh. It's a day of darkness and not light. And so this here is talking about 722, in retrospect here, that when, Assyria came and destroyed the nation in 722, Samaria and northern Israel were taken into captivity. And this is the oracle of doom. This is it. 8 to 14 it's the oracle of doom. And he, this place is decimated. Okay. And then we have these coming down here to 12 to 14. We can look at verse 12. We have this the sapiential rhetorical questions concerning justice. All right, and then in 13 to 14 we have this piece here on the pride of Israel's might and Yahweh's promise to exile. In 12 to 14. Or 13 to 14 here. So I have 2 points here, these sapiential rhetorical questions. And, it's the twofold rhetorical question concerning horses and oxen. Okay? And then there's a twofold explanatory basis of the rhetorical questions concerning, Israel's performance of justice and righteousness. And this is a scathing rebuke, justifying Yahweh's utter hatred of Jacob's defenses and his abhorrence of his pride. And so this is, this here, verse 12 is just real key to this. And then point 2 here, the pride of Israel's military might with basis statement. Basically, pride goes before the fall. And we have this wordplay on, rejoicing over Lo Devar, literally means nothing. And then we have this boast over the taking of Karnaim. By our might we have taken Karnaim is another pun on this city called Twin Horns. And then there's an explanatory basis in verse 14, and it's a concluding Yahweh reporting formula. This Ne'um Adonai Zebaot, this is the inclusio back to verse 8. And it says that Yahweh is raising up a nation against the house of Israel, and the extent of the destruction will be from north to south, from Lebo Hamath to the wadi of the Arabah. So there you go. You basically have 2 main points. A, which is 8 to 14. We have B, which is verses 12 to 14, and then we broke down the individual units within those respective, A and B here, and all of this stuff you just start itemizing the text, and this is exegesis. This outline is an exegetical statement concerning how you are to, what the intention of the author is, and where this text is flowing, and we're creating, units that have coherence and cohesion by context, and by using conceptual analysis to justify the individual units. Okay, then now we're coming to this particular slide, which shows the poetic nature of our first unit, along together with the structural analysis of the text, and so This is an important aspect here of poetry, is to be able to understand it, structurally, in the overall message here that Amos is presenting. So we come here to verse 8, Nishba Adonai Elohim Benafsho. So this would be line A, and then it's followed by Ne'um Adonai Elohei Tzevaot. So what I put here, it's actually like a dual, Yahweh speech report formula. But first of all, it says that Yahweh, the Lord Yahweh, has sworn by His own soul. So when we have an oath, that means that this cannot be reversed. There's no amount of repentance. There's no amount of sacrifice. When it's to this point, the lights are out. The judgment is coming, and it cannot be reversed. Just like you got to remember, for 3 transgressions, of Damascus, and for 4, I shall not revoke it. That means it's punishment. And remember, that was said 8 times, okay, in the OAN section of this is how the book opened up. Okay, but we'll see in the next chapter, in chapter 7, that Yahweh can offer, can show, Amos some measures of judgment that could come, like the first one about about in 7:1, it talks about the locusts. But Amos is able then to intercede with God, and say, hey, how can Jacob stand? This can't be. So then, God brushes it aside. So there's sometimes, that when God speaks judgment, that judgment can be averted if someone intercedes, in behalf of those whom Yahweh is speaking against. So this is what the prophet is to do. Remember, he's the watchman on the wall, according to Ezekiel, right? Chapter 3, or chapter 18 as well. That that when the prophet sees something, then he needs to blow the trumpet, and this is a metaphor that he's a watchman on the wall, and that then the people that they can make a decision of how they're going to react, to the warning. So here, this is irreversible. So when Yahweh swears by himself, I'm sorry, whoever is the offending party, they're more than screwed. Okay, and then so these function as introductory speech reporting formula. So the first line, emphasizes, the oath of Yahweh, and he swears by himself, and then there's this declaration of Yahweh, this oracle of Yahweh, God of hosts, and so God of hosts means God of armies. All right. So what is the essential oath? Well, it says here, Anochi Mitta'ev, I loathe the pride of Jacob, and the Armenotov and his citadels I hate. And then the last verse set of the tristic here is his Garti ir u Meloa, and I vihis Garti ir u Meloa, and I shall shut up. This is the literal translation. I shall shut up. That means he's shutting up the city to a siege of the besieging army, and in retrospect, that is the Assyrians, of 722. And that's how we can interpret this, and we can, the first Woe Oracle of the Day of Yahweh. Well, that all took place in 722. And so then this is so this here is also in 722, and it's the second Woe Oracle. Okay, and we looked at that last time about those who were at ease in Zion and those who trusted in Mount Samaria. So this is just the second half of of chapter 6, and this is 8 to 14. So he has this initial tristic. And then when we come here to 9, we no longer have poetry. It goes into prose. And we saw this mirrored exactly what happened in the first Woe Oracle of the Day of the Lord, and when we had that hypothetical reconstruction of the inescapability of the day of the Lord by the lion, and then the bear, and then finally the serpent. And this one here then just it talks about that it says that I shall shut up the city and its fullness. Well, this is an illustration to depict what what verse what this oath of Yahweh is like hypothetically. All right, so this is a hypothetical illustration of the inescapability of Yahweh's destruction, primarily of Samaria, but of the whole country. Any city within Israel, it's going to be destroyed. And then we have to. This is very somewhat cryptic. It's hypothetical, and as I told you before, it can be reconstructed, in different ways. But within reason, you are to think and contemplate on this, and then you are to reconstruct this in your own mind. That's what God wants everyone to do here, okay? So if you don't like it that the text doesn't give you enough information, well, it just means God wants you to ponder on it a little bit longer. Okay, that's all. Okay, what God has given you is enough. It's more than enough. Okay, He expects you then to, okay, well then let's, then we need to reconstruct, a hypothetical, fuller understanding here. So this is what's going on, and so it's it presupposes here that there. The city's already been attacked, and then there's 10 men, that happen to be, left in one house, and it says, and then they shall die. Okay, because He's shutting up the city and its fullness, everything in it. So this is, so these survivors here, these are people who fled. Israel as the Assyrian army was approaching, and then after the Assyrian army left, they're coming back to to go through what's left. Okay, so this is how do I make up that thing? The text allows you to recreate something on your own. Okay, we already told that there's 10 men left in a city, and they're all in one house, and they all die. Well, then these other people, well, they have to be people who fled before the Assyrian army came. Okay, it's like trying to find out what where did Cain get his wife? Well, obviously he had to marry his sister. Okay, so it's just stuff like that. The Bible allows us and demands of us for us to use our imagination along with the story. Okay, it's just that simple. But this interesting thing here is that when the uncle or the relative says to to one of these scouters who are left in the recesses of the house, is there anyone left with you? And he and he says no, and then he says, hush, for the name of Yahweh must not be brought to remembrance. And it's a basis clause. This is the basis here for him to be quiet. Okay, be quiet. Why? Because one must not make the name of Yahweh to be remembered in this place. Why? The fuller explanation comes in verse 11. For behold, Yahweh has commanded, and He will strike the great house into pieces and the small house into bits. So there you go. And this, so that's why 8 to 11 is a whole unit, and 9 to 10, offer this, this hypothetical illustration to describe what it meant that He was going to deliver up the city in its fullness, and then He tells you what that looks like, and then he offers why should not the name of Yahweh be mentioned? Well, it's because Yahweh's commanded for everything to be destroyed, and so since He's commanded for everything to be destroyed, if you're now mentioning the name of Yahweh, well, you just may be the next person to be destroyed. So count your blessings that you're still alive. Basically, that's what's being said here. And this, what you got to do, remember, meaning is always context driven. So so how do you determine the context of a passage? Well, you have to use, you have to start with, conceptual, analysis. It all starts there. Okay, what that means, conceptual analysis, is you're going through the text, itemizing the different conceptual ideas that emerge from the text. And then when you clearly have an ending point, you can say, okay, well, the text starts here and then it ends there. Why? Because conceptually the topic turns. It turns to, there's something completely different. And for our text, we already showed you that, this is the second Woe Oracle. Chapter 6 starts off with the Woe Oracle. 5:18 started off with the Woe Oracle. So at 5:18 all the way to 5:27 was the first Woe Oracle. And then this one here starts in 6:1. And we know that chapter 7 is the book of vision. So, all of chapter 6 is the last Woe Oracle. And then we looked, how did we break up chapter 6? So we saw 1 to 7 as a unit. And then, we worked through 8, down here to... to 14 is going to be the second unit, in which we are working on, and within 8 to 14, our first unit here, is Yahweh's oath oracle of doom and illustration of Samaria's defeat with basis statements 8 to 11. So the first basis statement came here, and then we have this additional basis statement in verse 11, which is a fuller account, that Yahweh's commanded the great house to be reduced to bits and the small house to pieces. So boom, there you go. You just this is structural analysis, and I'm not, I'm just following the text, and then you itemize the text. You make a hierarchical structure. Conceptually, you use coherence and cohesion. So coherence, would state that this unit goes from 8 to 11 because the repeated, use of the word house, in both 9 to 10 and then 11, and then that illustrates us back here to deliver up the city in its fullness, and cities, as we know, are full of houses. Okay, so I offer up this particular slide because I want us to look at the poetic structure of this is Yahweh's oath oracle here. Anochi mita'ev, I loathe the pride of Jacob. Ve'armenotav saneti, and his citadels I hate. So what I want you to see here, this here is, this here is chiastically constructed. So we have the verbal aspect here mentioned here in line A. Mita'ev anochi, although it comes in a participial form, that's fine. But we have in line B here, we have, notice here that the verbal aspect is mentioned first in the line, and in line B it's mentioned last. And then the object of the verb, for I loathe, what does Yahweh loathe? The pride of Jacob, right? And then so the object of the verb here is the pride of Jacob, and it's mentioned second here. Now, when you come down here to the second verset, it's mentioned first, the Armenotav, and its citadels I hate. So these are chiastically constructed. The verb is chiastically constructed. It's comes in the first part of the verset, where sonati comes in the second part of the second verset, and then it's matched here with the pride of Jacob being second, but in here it's the Armenotav, it's in the first place. And then remember, this is the tristic. So then now we have sonati here being in the second place, and now it's chiastically constructed against the Hiskarti, and I shall shut up the city and its fullness. And it's going to then be chiastically constructed against the Armenotav with Ir U meloah. Just so awesome. Okay, then coming in for a landing here in verses 12 to 14. And note here that in my particular outline, I've entitled this Sapiential Rhetorical Questions Concerning Justice, the Pride of Israel's Might, and Exile. So that properly takes up the content of all of verses 12 to 14. But we're going to, atomistically here look at point 1, sapiential rhetorical questions concerning justice and righteousness. And this takes up just verse 12 in and of itself, because when we come down here to 13 and 14, we're going to have a different topic, the pride of Israel's might with basis statement. Okay, the pride goes before the fall. So this is going to then take up verses 13 and 14. So let's look here at just at verse 12, and this here is consists of a quatrain. Okay, that's 2 disticks. Okay, making up a total of 2 disticks, to be able to essentially state a major point that Amos is doing in this prophetic oracle of Yahweh, and we've seen this the quatrain. We've seen the quatrain before. It occurs all the time. And it does offer usually enough information for a whole unit. And so it starts off with this rhetorical question here in 12a, at the Otnoch here. It's going, that's midway through the sentence, or of the verse, I should say. And then we have a basis clause here, 4. Okay, and this comes in the second half of the verse. And it then explains the sapiential rhetorical questioning that Amos offered here in 12a. So you're going to notice that this, as we've been going through Amos, there's tons and tons and tons of rhetorical questions, and you need to know that this is what God does. Just remember, go back to the garden. God's asking Adam, who told you were naked? Did you eat from the fruit that I commanded you not to? So God's always questioning. What, he asked the woman, what did you do? So there, it's always full of questions. When Yahweh, just remember this, when Yahweh asks a question, he's not looking for information. Okay, he's trying to draw out of your own soul that you will answer. You will be honest with yourself before God. So just remember, when God asks a question, he's not looking for information. So it's something much deeper than that. It's for your benefit, for self-reflection. So here's the rhetorical question. Hayit Rutsun Basela Susim. Do horses run on rocks? Literally like a mountain cleft. Okay. Or, and now this is just very literal, or does one plow with oxen? Okay. So we know here that we've got something missing here, because it's supposed to be an obvious question that answers no, but yeah, one does plow with oxen. So what it is that there's gapping going on here. Basela here is to come after, or does one plow oxen, on rocks or on a cleft? And the answer is obviously no. And I will show you, this method of gapping or ellipsis occurs all the time, and we've just seen it, and we're going to see it again. Okay, then coming then to this slide to demonstrate the poetic use of gapping or ellipsis, okay? And we're going to look here at verse 11. Just go back a verse. For, behold, Yahweh has commanded, okay, and he shall strike the great house into pieces, and the small house into bits. Now notice here, vihika, right here, all right, and he shall smite. So this verb is to also then be brought over to here, but you don't do it just because that you in your mind you mentally carry it over, and so we'll just read it. And he shall cause the great house to be struck into pieces, and you're supposed to carry it over. And he shall cause the small house to be struck into bits. So this verb here, is palindromatically carried over, and in your mind you repeat it twice. So likewise, when you come to 12 here, do horses run on rocks? Okay, or does one plow on rocks with oxen? And so then the answer is no. Okay, so then, this here, it explains the use of gapping or ellipsis. And we won't stop there. We're going to come down here to the second half of verse 12. For you have turned judgment into a poisonous herb, and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. So, you're to carry over this verb over to this clause as well. For you have turned, justice into a poisonous herb, and you have turned the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. So this use of gapping or ellipsis is used all the time. So when you come here to verse 12, do horses run on clefts of rocks? The answer is obviously no. They could barely even walk. Or does one plow oxen, on a cleft, on a mountainside of rock? And the answer is no. Okay, so this is what we mean by the poetic use of gapping or ellipsis. Okay, so once again, we will lean here upon Shalom Paul here for his thoughts here on this particular verse. Once again, Amos resorts to the sapiential style of the rhetorical double question, ha plus im, this is the interrogative he, to convey cogently his conviction, this time by comparing the actions of animals with their handlers with human behavior. Can a horse gallop over rocks? Is it possible for horses who were primarily employed for martial activities to run upon rocky terrain, cliffs, and mountainsides? Obviously not, for the rocks would ruin their hooves, injure them, and prevent them from all further effectiveness. Second, the two queries, however, presents a problem. The answer to the question as posed by the Masoretic text, can one plow with oxen, bivakarim here, is self-evident and natural. Of course one can and does, which of course would undermine the prophet's very intention and defeat his purpose. Amos is obviously drawing upon imagery familiar to him and his audience to make exactly the opposite point. The answer he expects is unmistakably a negative one. Hence, most commentators accept the redivision of the letters bivakarim into bivakar yam. Can one plow the sea with oxen? Such a question is preposterous and ridiculous, for it contradicts the natural order of things. Another suggested proposal to accentuate the nonsensicalness of this rhetorical question is to assume an ellipsis, and that's what I have decided to do, and simply supply the object from the first stick, or we can say versette. and do oxen plow upon rocks? Inane and insane, yet this is the very demented and deranged manner in which people are acting, totally bereft of reason. What is absurd in the animal world has become fact in Israel's world, for they have turned justice into a poisonous herb and the fruit of righteousness to wormwood. The perversion of justice is the perversion of the basic rules and standards of the human race and will eventually lead to disastrous results. One cannot upset the natural or moral order with impunity. Some very good words here, and this is what God does here. By using these rhetorical questions, then it's making you answer the question, and then it's inserting you into this life situation. Okay, then now we're coming then here to verses 13 to 14, the pride of Israel's military might with basis statement. Pride goes before the fall. And so we're going to look here at 13 to 14, okay? And it starts off here. Notice here that we have two tristicks in 13 and 14a. And note here, underneath the Otnok, that marks, that marks 14a, and whatever's after that is going to be the second half of the verse. And he says here, those who rejoice in Lodavar, and those who say, have not we by our own strength, we have taken for ourselves Karnaim. So this here is a pun, they're rejoicing over Lodavar. Why? Because Lodavar here, this oracle belongs to the time of the successful military operations of Jeroboam II in the Transjordan region, which warded off the incursions of the Arameans. And we saw that in chapter 1, verse 3. And then the Ammonites, which also, were in this area that Jeroboam, warded off. They were mentioned also, that God was going to judge the Ammonites in 1:13. So Amos, he must have encountered, Israel's military leaders, probably in the royal citadel of Samaria, and overheard their boastings and victories, over the land in Gilead. Now, they were doing all this boasting in their own flesh. They were rejoicing at Lodavar, and when you know what Lodavar means, nothing, literally no thing, or that's what it literally means. So they're rejoicing over nothing, which is baseless. And those who say, have not we by our own strength, we have taken for ourselves Karnaim, which Karnaim means two horns. That they've taken this, this city of Karnaim, the two-horned city. This represents the two horns of a bull, which means that they exerted their might and grabbed the horns by their two hands and then thrust it to the ground and took this city for themselves. But they're boasting in their own might. They're not giving any glory to God. This is all just their flesh, has nothing whatsoever to do with God and the man in the moon. And this is what Yahweh is very angry at. He's angry at they have forgotten God. Remember, this is Deuteronomy chapter 8. When you become successful in the land and you're fat and sassy, don't forget God. Okay, well, this is exactly what they did, and they just assumed they did this all by their own might. And then verse 14, for behold, I am, now look at how this thing is structured. Behold, I am raising up against you, O house of Israel, declares the Lord Yahweh of hosts, a nation. So the nation comes the very, very last. In the word order in English, it's not going to be like that. But in Hebrew, it puts off goy here to the very end. So this is all very, well thought out. And he was saving it for the very last, for the very last word. And so that, he's making points here in his ability then to, how to make this utterance. And then it, the text goes on to say, and they shall oppress you from Lebo Hamath unto the brook of the Arabah. Okay, so this basically reverses, the prophecy basically of, Jonah, son of Amittai from Gath Hepher. Well, God wanted that prophecy to be fulfilled, and God was hoping that, he wanted to give them one more last, great hurrah before, he was going to exile them, and hoping that they would turn and repent. So this is a reversal. God's reversing the prophetic word. We can see this in Jeremiah. If I say to a nation, I'm going to destroy you, and that nation repents, then I will relent from the word I spoke. So remember, God's word can be reversed, and just like look at what Joel did. Joel reversed. Isaiah said they'll beat their swords into plowshares. Well, Joel just reversed that. They'll be, it says beat your plowshares into swords. So it's all about time and place. If you're there, it just depends when you live, what oracle is going to fit your situation. And so oracles can be reversed in the Bible, and this one definitely is. And this ends the central. It's the last verse, and it's an oracle of Yahweh. So, oh my gosh, this is, if you can't hear, the prophecy of Jonah, then I guess you have to go back and do your homework. So this is a reversal of something that obviously was spoken before through the prophet Jonah. Even though the book of Jonah may have been compiled later, but it faithfully records what took place before Amos. That's how I would that's one way to explain it. But hey, this here. This is how this book ends, and we'll look here once again at these place names. Okay, so then in this prophetic oracle of Yahweh, he said that he would oppress them from Lebo Hamath. And remember last time when we looked here, the Orontes River begins up here where it says Kol Assyria. This is basically Baalbek area here. And then the river flows down this mountain valley. It comes out here into a plain, and it meanders, all the way up here to Antioch. And it comes out here into the Mediterranean here. And remember, this is Hamath here. And then Lebo Hamath is this area right here. I'd actually talking to a guy that lived in Syria, and he had traveled in Lebanon, and I asked him about Lebo Hamath, and the valley here between the Lebanon mountains and the anti-Lebanon mountains, and when you come down here, it turns into a plain about here, and it's the entrance to Hamath. So Lebo Hamath literally just means the entrance, or the way to go to Hamath. And he totally goes, oh yeah, that's exactly what it means. And so it was just nice getting somebody, a modern Arab, to confirm here. He knew the geography and had lived there for quite some time. Okay, so just remember here that Lebo Hamath, that God was going to oppress them from Lebo Hamath south. Okay, so just remember here, it's good to see things, topographically on a map, it can help you, then picture this where the Amos is talking about. You need to see it, topographically on a map. Okay, then coming then to this slide, remember he just said that he's going to oppress them from Lebo Hamath in the north to the brook of the Arabah. So this here is the region of the dead. This is the Dead Sea here, okay, and then this is the Jordan River coming down here, and this river is the Arnon, okay, typically in the Bible, and it traditionally separates Moab here from Ammon. But Israel's border, probably, according to some scholars who created this particular map here, that Israel's southern border came down here to the Wadi Arnon, and so this could be a reference here then to one of these particular wadis or rivers here that he's referring to. So he's basically essentially from the north to the south you're going to be oppressed, and then this is Yahweh's irreversible Ashivenu, lo Ashivenu, I shall not, revoke it. So when Yahweh makes this, this utterance, this is it's non-negotiable. Israel is being exiled. They have gone beyond the point of no return. Okay, then coming then to this slide, we're looking here at the Yarmouk River up north, and somewhere out in this area here is Lodavar, and maybe somewhere over here or over here it is Karnaim. So basically they're those who rejoice over Lodavar, they're rejoicing over nothing, and isn't it by our own power, but we have taken Karnaim by our own strength. The horns, the twin horn city. So this is over here in the this Bashan area, and the region of Gilead, where Jeroboam II had won back these Transjordan sites from the the Arameans during his reign. Okay, and this is just another map from this is just taken from from the Accordance Bible Bible map thing, and this is the Arnon here, and it's just a different map that would suggest maybe where this brook of the wadi of the Arabah. It could refer to this. It could be several others. But anyhow, so this would refer to the southern border of Israel at this time, where God has removed them from the land, and He has exiled them, and so this woe oracle comes to a conclusion. Okay, there's been another session of biblical theology, exegesis, and hermeneutics. Please like, share, and subscribe. And it's really been fun doing this. I loved working through this text of Amos, and we'll come to the Book of Visions next in chapter 7.